Welcome everybody to another great episode of the Alan and Aaron Sports Talk Radio Show. I'm Alan, and today we're joined by a spectacular guest. His name is Patrick Chester. He's a TEDx speaker. He's going to share with us his story on gambling addiction, how he can help you break the cycle. And this is going to be a very mature topic today, so viewer discretion is advised. I want to go ahead and bring Patrick Chester on. But before we do that, let me go ahead and thank our great sponsor for today. I want to thank Chef G's Florida Barbecue Sauce. So delicious and addicting, you may need a support group. So definitely go ahead and pick up a 4-pack at flbbqsauce.com. Again, it's flbbqsauce.com. Thank you so much, Chef G's Florida Barbecue Sauce, for being our great sponsor today. I'm joined here with Patrick Chester. He's a TEDx speaker. He's also a gambling addiction specialist, and he's going to talk to us about his challenges. And hopefully this talk will help you, the listener and viewer, and getting yourself out of addiction. So how did the gambling start for you? How did it all begin?
Sure. Yeah. First of all, thanks for having me on. Appreciate this. What a thrill it is to be with you guys or with you today. But yeah, it started early. I didn't, in my high school years, just simple stuff, right? Playing poker with buddies and that sort of thing, and not really recognizing the dangers that could come from it, But then as I moved into my college years, and then after college is when it really started to progress. But again, it started innocently enough, just simple things like card games and that sort of thing.
Okay, so it just started real innocently, just by doing simple things, nothing really too serious.
Yeah, and that's, I think, with most addictions, that's how it starts, right? You don't just dive in to the deep end right off the bat. But for somebody that's susceptible to addiction like myself and many others, over time it progresses and it sneaks up on you, and before you know it, you're in too deep, which is as we can get into, which is what happened to me.
Wow, sorry to hear about that. And that the reason why we really wanted to bring you on is because that's one of the unfortunate things that I see a lot of athletes, a lot of people in sports, and even friends that I have, that they start off with getting little scratch off cards, and it just seems to build from something real small like that. One of my friends who actually really has a problem, they started from scratch off cards. They don't see it as a problem. From your experience, can you see that becoming a problem?
Yeah, for sure. And for me, it was, I have a background in sports. My gambling was all sports related, as we can get into as it progressed. And so, yeah, like your friend you mentioned, it's like I said, it started with poker games and that sort of thing. But as I got into my college years and after that, I started betting small bets, placing small bets on football games and that sort of thing. It starts really small, $25 bets for me, $50 bets. But over time, whereas my friends could gamble and make small bets and stop if they lost, I couldn't stop. Okay. There was no shut off valve for me. And so I just kept going, and the bets kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And it became a game of chase for me. I'm chasing one bad bet after another.
Wow. Yeah. So it really seemed like it progressed small. How did you know or see to yourself, you know what, this is becoming a problem? What was the lightning bolt that said, hey, maybe I need to grab a hold of this?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. For me, I was in my mid-20s, living with buddies. I wasn't married, didn't have any kids at the time. And we split our rent 3 ways, and when it came time to pay the rent at the beginning of the month, I didn't have the money to pay it. And that's when it occurred to me in the back of my head, hey, I think you've got a problem here. You're not taking care of your financial responsibilities. And it was because I was using that money to gamble with, in my mind, thinking, well, I'll just win more and more and more. And by the time rent comes around or whatever it was, I'll have enough money and then some. But inevitably, it would never work out that way. I would over the course of time lose more than I won. Any gambler that tells you they win more than they lose is just lying, because that's just not how it works. And so that was the point, kind of around my mid-20s when I started to realize, I think there's something wrong here, and I wish, looking back now, I had done something about it then, but I didn't.
Yeah, it really seemed like it got a hold of you, unfortunately. And it seems like it was unfortunate in that regard. But a lot of people, you brought up a great point. A lot of people feel that when they have maybe a couple of losses, that their big win is coming. You, from experience, you can say more, speak on more on that, hey, your big win is not coming, more losses are coming.
Right. And that's the thing. That's the mentality of a gambler,
Mm.
especially me as a sports gambler. It's like, if I lost a game, and now as we move into my mid to late 20s, I'm not betting 25 or $50 on a game. I'm betting, a couple thousand on a game. And I'm doing this primarily through bookies. This is long before we had state sponsored sports betting in many states that we have now. And so I was sending money to offshore accounts into Nevada and that sort of thing, and placing bets that way. And, I'm losing more than I'm winning. And so, but in the mind of a gambling addict, it's just, okay, just one more bet. I'll just win that back and I'll double it up, because then it begins this process of, well, I just lost $1,500. Well, if I bet $3,000, I can get that back plus more.
Mhm.
And then that's when I started to spiral. Now I'm into my late 20s and getting close to my early 30s, right in that area. And things started to spiral out of control. And then, as we can get into, that led to a whole other set of problems, as I started to resort to crime and that sort of thing to feed my addiction.
Wow. So yeah, it seemed like it got really bad for you. And then what were you doing as far as work besides, going into that crime? What were you doing? It sounded like you were doing well financially at that point, at least bringing in money.
Great question, because I was actually working for myself as a contractor, a general contractor, right? And so I had a good reputation at that point. And so people trusted me, and they would trust me to do these projects, 20, 30, 40, $50,000 construction projects, remodel projects on their homes. And so it was around 2009 through 2013. I worked, so 4 or 5 years ago, I'm working for myself as a general contractor, accepting large sums of money from clients. Okay. They would bring me into their homes and we would sign the contract. It would say it was a $50,000 job. They would hand over a $25,000 deposit check. As a sports gambling addict, that's a challenge when somebody hands you $25,000. And so I would take, just for example, I would take half of that and gamble with it. And I would take the other half and start the project. In my mind, thinking, well, that $12,000 or $13,000 that I just took from that guy and gamble with, I'm just going to double that up and win more. I'm not taking it, I'm borrowing it. That's the mentality of a gambling addict. We're not setting out to screw people over on their money. We're looking at it as, we're just borrowing this because we're going to win more. And that's the cycle I got into. And as I alluded to earlier, it just becomes this vicious game of chase where you're just chasing one bad bet after another. And then I've got people calling me and saying, hey, why aren't you on my job? Where's the money?
Oh, wow.
And then things get scary at that point,
And then from that point there, where, people are asking, where's the money? What was your answers at that point?
I had all sorts of answers, and we become professional liars, right? That's what we do. We're not because we want to or we enjoy deceiving people. It's just what we do. We're trying to delay, deflect, because in my mind, if I could just put this guy off, for example, if I could put this client off for 3 or 4 weeks, come up with something like, my kid got sick, or I broke my ankle or something, but I'll get back on the job as soon as I can. Buy time. That was my whole thing. If I could just buy time, then I could go back over here and gamble some more and win and get that money back and get back on the job and finish it. Again, my goal was never just to take people's money and hit the road, but my brain was so sick. All I could think about was gambling and how I was going to win more. And I'll say this too, while this is all going on, I'm married. I got married back in 2006. My wife knew nothing about this, so now we're years into our marriage. We have our first son. She has no idea this is going on. She knows that we have financial problems, but she doesn't know why, right? And so that's the other side of this. Gambling addicts, we're able to hide it. We're not like drug addicts or alcoholics where you can see it on us physically. There are no outward signs with a gambling addict. That's the problem with it. Usually by the time it's discovered, it's too late. And so not only am I doing this and living this lifestyle, I'm also living a lie. Everything I'm doing is a lie and deception and everything else, because I don't want anybody to know about it.
I know how life kind of comes full circle. Things that are in the dark usually come out to the light eventually. How did the clients find out, and how did your wife and family find out?
Yeah. So eventually what happened with my clients, for example, is, in the internet age now, you can find out just about anything you want on anybody. As I'm doing this over the course of 2 or 3 years, people are filing complaints online with the state, right? And so some of my clients started investigating and doing some research on me, and they were finding these things out, and they would connect, for example, one client would find another client, and then they would start talking, and then they're like, whoa, he did the same thing to us. They would contact the state would get involved. And then before I knew it, law enforcement was calling me. And I was finally charged in 2013 with 2 counts of first degree theft for 2 separate projects that I had been working on, where, the evidence they had was there was no denying it. Like they gave me this money and I never finished the project, and they charged me. And so that process takes a while. The legal process takes a while. Once you're charged with something, it was a year and a half or 2 years later, actually, before I was actually convicted and sentenced. But so again, and that was all going on from about 2013 to 2015, all while my wife still had no knowledge of it. She wouldn't find out until later, around 2000. Well, it was early 2015 when she found out.
Wow. And how did she, find out?
Well, it was an interesting situation. We were actually down in Arizona for the Super Bowl. This would have been 2015, end of January. And prior to that, I had sent an email to a family member, I think out of desperation more than anything, just saying, hey, look, I've got some issues here. I've got some gambling problems. And that family member turned it over to my wife's father. And so unbeknownst to me, while we're out of town, and then we came back from the Super Bowl, it would have been February 2nd or February 3rd of 2015. And as soon as we got back, my father-in-law let my wife know what was going on. They arranged an intervention for me the very next day, not knowing the full scope of what I had done. They had no idea. They just knew that I had a gambling problem and that I needed help. And so it was at that point, they arranged that intervention, and I was immediately sent off to treatment. I was put on an airplane and off to treatment in Minnesota, to a place that dealt specifically with gambling addiction.
Wow. So definitely that's a lot right there. I mean, are you glad that they went ahead and found help for you at that point, or were you like kind of rebelling against them helping you?
I put up no fight at that point. In fact, I welcomed it, because I didn't have the courage to come right out and own it earlier, expose myself earlier, which I should have done. There were many junctures along the way where I could have said something to somebody. And that's the thing that I'm trying to get out there and help people understand now. It's like, if you think there's a problem, it's time to say something now before it gets too bad, because it never should have gotten to the point where it did with me. But so when it was presented to me, I was on board with it. I'm like, yeah, I'll go. I am sick. I am a mess. And so I was put on a plane, like I say, and I was sent off to treatment for 30 days, intense treatment. And during that period of time, though, is when things got really bad, because my wife had no idea all of the stuff that I had done, all of the collateral damage. I had involved her. I had brought her name into it, her banks, in fact, I took $28,000 from her retirement account during those years to feed my addiction without her knowledge. There were all sorts of things that I did that she had no idea about, but she would find out while I was in treatment. And those were, man, I mean, that was a rough stretch. But yeah, I didn't fight it for a second, because I knew that was the only hope I had was to go to treatment.
And I'm so glad you did and got the treatment. And from somebody who hasn't gone to treatment, who maybe before they get to that point, what did you learn in treatment that really helped you?
Yeah, it's a good question. What I learned going into treatment, I had the idea that I'm just a bad person, right? I had why I'm doing these things. I know they're wrong. Why am I doing it? I'm just a bad person. But what I learned in treatment was that that's not necessarily the case. With gambling addicts, it's very similar to an alcoholic and a drug addict, because it's all about the dopamine in the brain, and so they're very similar. And so what I learned was that I wasn't a bad person, but my addiction had taken over. Okay, and when somebody's in the throes of a severe addiction, they're not rational. They're not making good choices. It doesn't mean that they're a bad person. It means that they're sick and they're making bad choices. And so that's what I learned. Mm-hmm. And so once I got through that, and I also left treatment with some tools to manage like okay, now I'm going back into society again. How am I going to live a life that I'm not accustomed to? How am I going to manage these urges to gamble? And how am I going to watch a football game now without putting thousands of dollars on it? And so they give you the tools. They gave me the tools to kind of manage those urges. You know what I mean? And so, and that was really difficult for the first few years. I had to just basically change the way I lived and the way I thought. It's basically rewiring the brain. But once I got through the first couple of years, it gets better, and then you get, I enjoy life so much more now that I can go through each day and not have to lie about everything. That's fun, not having to think about all the stories and come up with all the nonsense to get through the day. So, and yeah, that's what I learned in treatment, because we make bad choices as addicts, that doesn't make us bad people. It's just about how we respond to that, how we change the course of our life.
Exactly. It's just altering things. And I want people to understand that, I know that there was some real serious thoughts on your side about maybe it was not worth it, but you pulled yourself out of that. Talk about somebody who gets to that point of, what, it's just not worth living. They might be making a huge mistake.
Yep, and that's the scary part about it, especially with gambling addiction, because it's so easily hidden. Oftentimes we get to a point where it just becomes too much. Okay, so for me, it was I had created so much financial carnage, and I was over $1 million in debt. Nobody knew about it. The walls were closing in on me, and you can't. It's hard to find a way out of that. And that's where I got to that point, where I'm sitting in my car one day staring out the window thinking, man, my wife and son would be better off without me. And you can't, it's hard to find light. When you're in the darkness like that, it's hard to find the light. What you got to do, what I should have done, and thankfully I didn't go through with that, but what I should have done was reached out to somebody. And that's a hard thing to do when you're sick and you're scared as an addict. And many addicts get that way, not just with gambling, but drugs and alcohol as well. They get to a point of desperation where they think there's no hope. There's nobody that will help me. And it's not true. And I know that now, but I didn't at the time. And so that's the important thing for any addict to remember, is that there are compassionate, caring people in this world, and somebody will help you. You just have to reach out and say, hey, I'm struggling.
Yeah. And that's definitely a great thing. And with today's, you mentioned, with today's new gambling, you can do it on the apps, you can do things like that. And what can you give people who may start getting into that will prevent them from getting it into a serious habit?
Focus on this, responsible gambling. Just like people can drink responsibly, people can gamble responsibly as well. I can't, but I know that many people can. And so I try and reach those people early, teenage years and that sort of thing, and just explain to them, hey, it's so much more accessible now than it was when I started gambling. So you just need to be aware of what can happen. Okay, these are the dangers out there. All of these kids, these high school kids and college kids, are being bombarded with gambling advertisements, especially if you're watching a sporting event. Yeah. They're everywhere. But no, they're not hearing about the dark side of it. All they're hearing is how great it is. And you can put $200 on this and win $1,000, and it's just all fun and games. Well, it's not. And so it's about recognizing what can happen, understanding the risks out there. Just like, as kids, we're all taught that, to watch out for drugs and alcohol and be smart and responsible. But we're not talking to our kids about the dangers of gambling and what can happen, because in many respects, it's new to us in the US. I mean, for example, over in the UK, they've had legalized sports betting for years, and they're now starting to see what the big time ramifications are with that, because people were a mess over there. And that's what's going to happen here, because we're not educating anybody. And so it's just about awareness and understanding the dangers.
And now you do speaking to help people who run into the dark side of gambling. What are your functions you also speak for TEDx? Talk about that too. What do you do now to help out others? Right.
And so what I do is I share my story, for one, because I think, look, I went to good schools. I was educated. I had a good upbringing, but I went over to the dark side, and I kind of take them through chronologically how that works and how that went and where I went and the things the choices I made to feed my gambling addiction. And when I do that, they sit up and they listen, because I don't look like I don't look like somebody who's living, under a bridge. I look like most people do, and these things can happen to anybody. And so it's trying to connect with the young people. That's my goal. It's like trying to connect with these people that are, most addictions begin in the teenage years, and so they're not getting this anywhere. They're not hearing about the dark side, like I said. And so for me, it's about connecting with them and showing them that, hey, this is what can happen if you're not careful.
Yes. And, next year, the Super Bowls in Arizona, are we safe to say that you're staying away from gambling and doing things in any of that regard?
Well, I'll tell you, that Super Bowl brings back a lot of bad memories for me. I mean, clearly that was the end of the road for me as a gambler. I can watch a game now and not have to have money on it. But first of all, my team was playing in that game. The Seahawks were playing the Patriots. The Seahawks are my team. And the side note, this was my final bet. The last bet I ever made was on that game. I'm there with my brother-in-law, who I had just borrowed thousands of dollars from a couple weeks before that. And I had given him some weird excuse, like I needed it for part of a down payment on a house, which was all, oh, sorry, I shouldn't have said that. But it wasn't, it was for gambling. And so I'm sitting there and I'm watching my team, and we had the ball on the 1 yard line, and we had Marshawn Lynch in the backfield. All we had to do was run the ball into the end zone to win the game. And I would have won that bet.
Yeah.
But I lost, and it wasn't even my money, it was his money. And he's sitting next to me. He has no idea. And so it was interesting. That was my final bet. And I was on a plane 3 days later to treatment. And so, yeah, the Super Bowl back in Arizona might bring back some bad memories for me, for sure.
Yeah, that was a tough Super Bowl too for Seahawks fans. But yeah, I'm glad that that's behind you now. How can someone reach out to you to get, have you speak, or maybe get some help from you and share your story?
Sure. Yeah. So the best ways are either through my website, patrickchester.com, or Twitter's another good spot to find me. It's at Patrick Chester 9, the number 9. And what I do is, I try and get in front of young people and families of gamblers too, because a lot of times the families they're lost. They've just found out that their loved one has a raging gambling problem and has taken thousands of dollars, and they don't know what to do. So I try and reach out to them as well and say, hey, here are some things you can do. Here are some resources, places you can call, and that sort of thing. And so I try and be a source of hope for them, because 7.5 years ago, if you looked at me then, you would have just, I didn't have any hope, right? And my family was broken because of the addiction, because of my addiction, all the things I had done and all the lies I had told. And so I try and get in front of family and young people and just say, hey, look, this is a process, but you can get through it.
Yeah, so that's definitely encouraging. So people should reach out to you and definitely listen to what you have to say, because your story is very, very inspiring. I'm so thankful that you shared with us today. Is there any other, food for thought that you can give to people who maybe are thinking about getting help but not sure?
Yeah, again, the main thing is, and again, this goes with any addiction. You just got to say something. It's not easy. And if you're ashamed or embarrassed to go to somebody close to you, like a friend or a family member, pick up the phone. Sometimes it's easier to tell a stranger, like somebody at, you can call the suicide prevention line, Gamblers Anonymous. They have phone numbers for that. For alcoholics and drug addicts, same thing. There are numbers you can call and just talk to somebody and say, hey, look, I'm struggling with this. What can I do? And they can point you in the right direction and give you some help and some pointers and some resources to work with to get yourself out of the hole that you're in. The longer it goes, the more damage we're doing, and we betray the trust of the most important people in our lives, which is a really hard thing. Once that trust is broken, it's really hard to get that back. And so that's what I would say to anybody is just if you think you're struggling, you are, and it's time to reach out to somebody.
Yeah, it's definitely great words there. Really appreciate you joining us here on the Alan and Aaron Sports Talk Radio Show, Patrick Chester. And thank you for sharing your story. It's been really encouraging. It's going to be encouraging to a lot of people. And thank you for joining us today.
Yeah. Hey, thanks. I appreciate your time. I really do.
I really
have a good day.
You do the same. Likewise. Take care.
Thanks.
You all. Bye-bye now.